I'm actually at the very beginning of my residency at the Historic Dockyards in Portsmouth, but I have been collaborating with them for the last couple of years. And my current residency spans actually 4 different institutions because there is the National Museum of the Royal Navy, which is sited in the Historic Dockyards in Portsmouth, and that also comprises of HMS Victory. So there's a big emphasis on Nelson and all of that side of kind of naval history. Then there is the Royal Navy Submarine Museum, which is in Gosport, they're all undergoing this stage of conversion at the moment, becoming one enormous institution. There is also the Fleet Air Arm Museum in Yeovilton, so that is all the aviation collection, starting with First World War planes and going right up to kind of current fighter planes in Afghanistan, and sort of tracing all the history of aviation. And there is also the Royal Marines Museum in Southsea. So it's a very big span of institutions. And the greatest challenge for me so far, even though I've kind of been immersed in some of the collections for 2 years, is just the scale of it. And my big challenge is actually selecting things and how do I go about looking at things, how do I access artifacts. So I'm really glad I've got this length of time. And I'll actually talk to you about what I've done so far, but most of what I've done so far is preliminary research, because I have this anxiety that there's so much to see, and also I have a weight of responsibility because it charts so many personal stories and histories, and it's very emotive, and some of the stuff that I encounter, some of the difficult things in the archives, I do actually find very moving and emotive, and I have to go away and almost kind of assimilate it and think about it for a while. So just to give you a bit of context to start with, I'll show you just a few pieces of my past work to kind of show you where I'm coming from. So I'll just click that. Does that look all right? I can't see it. It looks funny from the side on. Is that? It's fine? Okay. So my training is really as a printmaker. So I did a master's at Camberwell, which is a very traditional printmaking course. So I learned all the techniques that were really useful to me, but I actually found the whole concept of an edition of prints that were well editioned, something that brought out the naughty schoolgirl in me. I didn't want them to all be beautifully registered. I didn't want to wear the white cotton gloves. I actually really liked the idea of subverting an edition. So each one could have this semblance of being similar to the next, but each one had its own identity. And I felt on a metaphorical level that said so much about how we all behave within groups and things like that. So it really brought me onto what a print could be. So I was really interested in a print as a 3D structure. I was interested in kind of unraveling the preciousness of the kind of fine art print. So this is all large-scale photocopies. So really kind of low-tech copies that also had elements of hand painting in, so that people had to really think, if they looked at each bit that kind of interconnected, there were things that were different that I'd actually applied by hand. So it was all those kind of issues. Again, putting in a space, lighting it so they weren't individual precious objects, but they kind of built up and can be recreated in different spaces. So that's one example of my work. This is much more recent. This was a commission from Dartington Arts to work with the choreographer, the American choreographer Stephen Koplowitz, who does a lot of site-specific dance performances. And he had a commission to produce, I think, 6 dance performances across Plymouth, all with a water theme. So some of them involved the dancers getting in the water and all sorts of fascinating stuff. And the one that I was commissioned for was the Mayflower Steps. So this really kick-started for me the whole concept of a boat. Stephen knew that I worked in paper sculpture, and he wanted me to make this series of paper boats. And I didn't want to make the kind of party hat ones that everyone thinks about. So I wanted to find a very simple notional boat shape. And these were all cut by hand, so there are over 300 of them. And it took ages, and my fingers really started to go. And lots of things were thrown up from that were really interesting, and I loved working outside. And again, the idea of them not being intrinsically precious objects, you know, they were all throwaway, but they were there for this kind of moment in time, was really important to me. But based on that, and my fingers were absolutely knackered by that stage, I thought, what else can I do? What other processes can I use? And I went on a course on laser cutting, and then that got me very excited about the possibilities of that. Because as a printmaker, there is this idea that once you've got a file, you can reproduce it lots of times, but you've got the possibility of working with lots of different scales and lots of different materials. So you have the same, but it can be metal, it can be acrylic, it can be paper, it can be big, it can be small. So I got very excited about all of that. And also what you can cut. So really, really fine filigree structures and curves and text if you want to. So this was an installation I was commissioned to make for Wolverhampton Art Gallery about this time last year, in fact, which tied in with a show they had called The Joy of Making. So it's really based on the Stephen Koplowitz boat shape, but much more elaborate. And they've all got kind of little scenarios. So very much the idea of a kind of escape vessel, a little microcosm of the world with people sailing away with maybe what they can take with them. So that's just a little brief bit of context. And really on the back of this kind of work, I was approached by Portsmouth to produce a piece of work as one of 9 artists to celebrate their centenary. So the museum opened in 1911. And this was my first contact with Portsmouth, and we were all invited to spend 2 days in the archives. And they were a wonderful team of people, and very, very keen to give us kind of almost free rein. For me, I really felt like a child in a sweet shop. I thought, this is incredible that you give me so much access. I talked a little bit about what I was interested in. And 2 of my great heroes, which are James Gilray and Cruikshank, the great English satirists, they've just got piles of, you know, the most iconic, fantastic prints. So I got very excited. This is one of them, which is called The Extirpation of the Plagues of Egypt. So it's about Nelson's great victory at the Battle of the Nile against the French. And my husband is French as well, so that kind of makes me chuckle in a way. I love the fact that we were these adversaries and we've kind of come together. I think this is a great part of English culture, our ability to have this kind of very caustic wit and satire. And I think it's a great way to kind of put forward a much more serious message. And in Navy culture, there is always this very subversive element, which I like as well, this need to tell the truth by being kind of witty or cheeky or rude. Or in this case, it's a very, I think, elegant image. I love the tricolour crocodiles, which represent the French. And Nelson is represented as this kind of colossus with his big baton kind of beating them all. So there are lots of prints like this. And then I designed a series of vessels. I made a flotilla, taking the kind of emblematic colours of red, blue and white. So there was this sense of them being adversaries. And they've all got images, so there's sort of human cargoes. There's ones with faces. There's one with people having a banquet on. And the middle vessel, which has got images of slaves being freed, because the Navy was very much involved in the abolition of slavery along the west coast of Africa. This becomes the boat where they all come together. So there is a kind of message of the adversaries becoming allies, and that was the name of the final piece. And this is it installed in the Nelson galleries. So they placed it underneath a painting by Thomas Looney of the Battle of Trafalgar, and they put it next to another Gilray print. So that was really the kind of first contact I had with Portsmouth. Since then, I was so excited about this particular commission that I asked if I could just go back and go in the archives and spend longer, just because it's such an amazing resource. And to be honest, I would have gone for free, because I just thought it was great. So I went back on several occasions, and at that point I was really interested in the early explorers, the search for the Northwest Passage. In fact, I'll just click onto this image. And it was a time when it was the centenary of Scott's polar expeditions and things. So they've got a lot to do with Scott, because the Navy was very involved in some of these early expeditions. And I really got to know the staff, and I think that's quite important, is when you become a familiar face, you really garner a lot more trust. And at that point, when I was going back and forth just doing my own research, they proposed the residency to me. And I just thought, fantastic, this is great, so I really want to do it. And because I'm their first ever artist in residence, it kind of threw up lots of problems. They don't really know how to at that stage, didn't really know how to set up a residency. There were a lot of questions like, what are you going to do? What are you going to make? What are you going to put in the exhibition? I kind of had to kind of unravel all of that and say, you know, we do need to have a period of research. I do need a period where I'm completely immersed in the archives, and then we sort of talk about production. But they have been absolutely fantastic, and they've allowed me to negotiate the terms of my own residency. So it really is brilliant. So that's why I've got 2 years. Also, because of the technology that I also use water jet cutting. I can't establish myself in Portsmouth. I also have a young family, so I can't move lock, stock and barrel. And I think this is a sort of case in point for particularly women of my age who want to be artists in residence, but also have other family commitments. That, you know, often I haven't applied for things because there hasn't been that ability to move around so much. So for me, this has been ideal. So I had a lead-in period where I visited all the institutions, and they asked me to sort of start to have a search and think about what I wanted to do. So I had 6 months just visiting the other institutions, meeting everybody, and I came up with themes in my work. But I've got too many to go through today, because again, the collection is just so vast. It's still my great problem to whittle it all down. But one of the things, I suppose, is my worry about it being a military museum in a military context, and going in as a woman with all my preconceptions about what that might be. To start with, one of the things that really interested me was the very early part of the exploration and the wanderlust, the age of discovery, that Renaissance spirit of adventure and curiosity, which I think everybody shares, before it gets too grim and post-colonial and really kind of difficult stuff to deal with. So for me, this is one of the very, very iconic images in the collection, which is in the Admiralty Library. And it's by John Webber, and I've got the title, but it is Captain Cook on the left, giving a medal, which in itself I think is very peculiar, to the Aboriginal leader in Adventure Bay in 1777. So it really is the beginning of everything that happened since. And in my mind, it's almost like a picture of the Garden of Eden, although it's very contrived, very stylized, very theatrical, with all one side, one set of players on one side and one on the other. There is a kind of adversarial feel even here. But it is like, it's like the Garden of Eden before the fall, and I think this medal really symbolizes all the things that are about to happen. And the medal, I've since found out, is just a picture of the sovereign George III on it, so it's really us starting to stamp our identity on the indigenous populations around the world. So I know that on the back of this image, I haven't actually got pictures yet, but this is something that I really want to investigate further. This is a piece I've since done, which is about the Bein punitive expedition, which I think in your notes that you've got printed, there's quite a lot of information about that, so I won't repeat it all. But it is a notoriously contentious period of British history, and I think the whole empire building, imperialist part of our history there are large chunks of it I still do feel we need to atone for. And I think, as Sheila was saying, there are objects in collections that are supposed to be presented in an impartial way, but you cannot be impartial to things like a Bein ivory tusk, knowing that it's been looted and people have been massacred. And so that, again, there's very, very emotive material to do with this. And I was working, Kiri, who is modelling it, was at the time the cultural heritage trainee, and it was part of her research as well. So we worked together, and her ancestry is Nigerian, so she had very kind of strong personal interest in it as well. So we built up this piece together, and it is, I think I've got some more details, a laser cut collar, again using these emblematic colours, with spurs radiating out that are also like dugout canoes and ivories. And the images, even though perhaps from the outside it looks very decorative and pretty, the images themselves are of people being shot in cold blood, or there's lots of horrible stories of dead bodies hanging from trees and awful, really grim things. So it is a combination of all of that imagery together. And again, worn as a kind of neck piece or a neck brace or something oppressive. So that's one of the pieces that I've done so far. The theme of extreme environments is fascinating, this desire that the human race has to go as far as possible in any direction, motivating all these advances in engineering and technology. And again, to start with, I feel very out of my depth if I'm going to, say, the Fleet Air Arm Museum. They have fabulous displays of gas turbine engines, and that I go in and I think they're really beautiful. They look like the most extraordinary sculpture, but I don't understand quite yet all of the engineering, but I am fascinated by the fact that you can do these things. And on my last visit, I got to sit in the cockpits of all these World War II planes and World War I planes. And that throws up all sorts of weird stuff. So it's thrilling, it's amazing, it's iconic. The dials are all radioactive, so I got the health and safety warning, do you want to sit in here because you're going to get radiation? I just thought, oh, well, they did, so I will. And then the whole thing of sitting in the cockpit, seeing the joystick with the trigger, the red button, and it's just repugnant. So there's so many mixed emotions, but it's also the most amazing historical artifact. The other thing that all the collections have is the most mammoth collections of photography. On my last visit to Submarine Museum, I was in the photo archives. I mean, this is, again, I had terrible problems trying to whittle down out of everything I've got what I was going to show you today, because in my opinion, they're all amazing for all different reasons. But these are pictures of World War II submarines in the Baltic, frozen into the ice. First of all, there's a part of me that thinks, why would you want to go there, do that, go in a submarine under the ice? In World War II, they would seal down the hatches, the escape hatches, because if the enemy put a depth charge into the water, they just pop open and the submarine would flood and you just sink. So sealed them all shut. So submariners knew when they went off, if they did get hit, that was it. There was just no coming back. So stories of bravery and blind courage are so humbling. So I start to feel my job there is very much about them and not about me. It's very humbling, some of it. I've done a few little kind of tryout pieces that are potentially installation pieces. The very early explorers going out on the pack ice with very little kit. I mean, there's an 1875 expedition in the Admiralty Archives. They've got all the drawings of all like the cooking stoves and the tents and the sledges they made. And it's all so rudimentary, and you know they're all going to get scurvy, got terrible frostbite, and in the very early expeditions they'd be press ganged into going. So they didn't even have proper clothes, they were malnourished. So all of that again is very, very fascinating. This is a recent exhibition I had at the Devon Guild of Craftsmen for work that I have done with Arts Council funding prior to this residency. So there's a combination of different things. So I'm working different materials. So this is a laser cut stainless steel panel light box which I think I've got more images of, but there's a submariner looking through a periscope. There is a slotted aluminium structure which is water jet cut, but again using this concept of multiples, so each piece is the same but slots into itself, so it's like a big explosion. There's lots of people coming out of torpedo tubes and things. And then these paper cuts, I'll talk to you, I've got some bigger pictures. But to give you an idea of the kind of different materials I'm working with. So this is a sort of trial piece for the light box. These are laser cut paper. I think I've mentioned it in my notes as well, but a lot of the feelings I have, I suppose, coming from my art background, my very liberal background, are just the horror of being in a military context. Some of the things I can't fathom. And you know, I mean, talking to some of the curators, that German submariners had great sympathy and respect for British submariners, for their bravery, and the fact that really they were living the same life. They just happened to be, for whatever reason, on opposite sides. So it is this idea that, you know, they're doing the same thing. The enemy is academic. They've got no sense of the real world apart from through all their instrumentation, and but they can't actually see each other. So, you know, I sort of wrestle with some of this. So that's an image of that. Again, these are images from the Submarine Museum. I don't know if any of you know about this. They were called Charioteers, and basically they were human torpedoes. So they sat in little kind of bucket seats on top of a great big warhead, and they were sent off from the mothership to bolt this onto another ship and then just sort of swim back to... It's just completely insane, bonkers. So, you know, you go in from your, I suppose from my aesthetic point of view, and I think, well, this is just an incredibly sort of surreal image. It's fascinating on that level. And then all the horror kicks in, and then the bravery and the blind courage of the people doing it, and then the insanity of the regime that makes people do these kind of things in the first place. And then I have to put this back in the museum context and think, I can't just be relentlessly negative. I've got to find a way of presenting this. So there are so many strange and surreal images, which are also quite wonderful. Life on board is this strange microcosm. They're detached from the rest of the world. So, you know, training a SEAL to perform on top of the submarine is just an extraordinary image. And then a little sketch that I've done from it. So, not feeding the seal fish, but people. So, this theme has probably been the main theme of my work so far, which sort of encapsulates a lot of the things I was talking about. For me, it seems completely absurd to send young, fit, healthy people to war, to give them stringent medical tests in order for them to go and be blasted to bits and killed, and there are so many stories of it. This is a picture of actually a German U-boat being sunk by the British in minutes, and it's just a firestorm. And it's just, I don't know, I just find it completely horrific in handling the images. But then, you know, it's this idea of fighting fit. You're fighting fit in order to go and die, basically. So, you know, for me, that sums that up. So I have produced, to begin with, these pieces that actually look at the Army and Navy medical. So there is a kind of triptych of 3. This one is a kind of ear, nose and throat examination. So they're all based on kind of archive photos. So he's having his tonsils looked at. The medic has got a torch, but as the torch shines on him, obviously on the other side he starts to be punctured by bullets and missiles. Again, the emblematic colours, so you've got the kind of colours of water and blood and whatever else you want to think of. And then you'll see I've got another picture. There are all these cascades that come down. So again, this is at the Devon Guild, but they all tumble down onto the floor. They're also laser cut in acrylic and heat formed. The little teardrops I gave you all form part of this kind of cascade. So they all hook onto each other. They're also life rafts and things. that hook on, which I'll show you. These ones. So there are lots of things on submarines and aircrafts and ships to do with your safety. So muster points and life jackets and spare oxygen. But you know that in those situations, I mean, I was told when I sat in the cockpit of a Spitfire, the chances of you actually escaping and getting the hood off with all the kind of wind turbulence and all the places where you could get your parachute hooked on, your chances of survival were so small. So there is, I think, a great pathos in the image of a life jacket. So within the life jacket, I have placed kind of images of bones and skeletons, and they've still got their kind of stripes on the sleeves and things. So that's all part of that one. This is the second one, so this is based on the submariner having his ears examined. I mean, often their ears would get damaged, their eardrums would get damaged, so out of his ear on the other side, you've got sinking battleships and water turning to blood, I suppose. And then this is the pilot's one, so he's having the eye test. And his head is locked in position. And then I suppose rather like the periscope one, all the missiles that are being shot out then kind of come back at him. So it forms this, well, I suppose it's almost a bit burlesque as well from a distance. It looks a bit sort of fairground and jolly until you get up close, and then it's quite grim. And then I think I'm there because I talk a lot. Gender is obviously another really big thing. Being a woman in a military museum throws up all sorts of stuff, but maybe if we have time for questions afterwards, we could talk about that. Okay, well, thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you. Thank you very much.